Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Friday, July 30th, and we're breaking down this massive 15-game slate that we have over on DraftKings today. We got 30 teams, some decent pitching, and some good offense to talk about here, so it should be a fun one to break down here, and I'm certainly looking forward to doing just that. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so, and you do enjoy the content that you are viewing today. And if you want to follow me over on social media, you want to find me using the handles in the bottom-hand corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon and get access to some extra content that I don't show here over on YouTube, you can find it in the link down below in the description right beside the orange bubble. But you get access into my entire spreadsheet, my projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, Discord community. I do update everything throughout the day. So if you want to check it out, link is down below. And since Patreon does charge you in the first of the month and when you sign up, more than happy to hit that refund button for you for the next couple of days as long as you do continue your patronage on August 1st. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. It's just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. And if you look hard enough, you can find some pretty soft lines to take advantage of. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on Prize Picks, you can get a free money bonus up to $100. That's an instant deposit match up to $100, so it's free money. Why not use it to your advantage if you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we'll start with the pitchers and move on to the bats. And I do want to mention, if you guys see my shirt, if it's sparkling everywhere, it's because it's kind of the same color as the green screen, so it might kind of bother you throughout the video, so I do apologize for that, but hopefully it's nothing too annoying here. But anyway, we should probably talk some pitching here, and we have some good pitching options on today's slate. We have a couple of good SP1s to talk about, then the SP2s look pretty solid relative to their price points, and the matchups that they have today and their upside looks pretty good, so I don't think we have to fret too much about pitching today, plus there's lots of good offenses to pair them up with and some cheap bats if you want to double spin up today. So you can pretty much do whatever you want at pitcher today, but we'll start up top with the spin up options that we have in Lance Lynn and Corbin Burns. And we'll start with Lance Lynn here, $10,300. I'll tell you right now, if I had to pick between the two of Corbin Burns and Lance Lynn, I prefer Burns because he has more upside in my opinion, but anyway, sticking with Lance Lynn, he's kind of like a boring good pitcher where you're never really too excited about rostering Lance Lynn, but you don't really hate it, and he typically does get the job done. It's just that price point's a little bit rough for me. And the Indians, I mean, that's a pretty soft matchup here. They just got rid of Cesar Hernandez at the top of their lineup, and if you're looking at the bottom of the order for the Indians, there's some really easy outs there. Like, you probably never even heard of a couple of guys down low, so not really too worried about him giving up too many runs here. Only a 3.5 implied team total against him, which I believe as of right now is the lowest on the entire slate. I am recording this video the night beforehand, so obviously those lines do shift quite a bit by the time I wake up, so I do apologize if anything is way off from what you're seeing here, but I can't expect anything to change too drastically. He's also a pretty heavy favorite. I do think the White Sox should be able to pick him up the win here. They have a good matchup versus Mejia, and I know the White Sox have kind of crushed us the past couple of days if you've been rostering the White Sox offense, but I mean, yesterday doesn't even count because they were missing some of their best players in Tim Anderson, Eloy Menez, and Jose Abreu. If you guys played that day slate, and they just, I don't know what happened versus Chris Bubich, but I mean, it was terrible. But I think they can bounce back here versus Mejia. And if we're looking at Lance Lynn splits this season, and this is what I mean why he's kind of like a boring good pitcher. Like, he's got a 27.5% K rate, which is respectable, but as price point, I mean, Corbin Burns has got a 36% K rate, so there's just way more upside there in my opinion. Plus his xFIP and Sierra are about 2 runs higher than his ERA, so regression is due for him. But I don't really think that's going to happen here versus Cleveland. I think he can keep kind of sliding by here. It'll catch up at some point, but I think he'll be just fine. Around 10 Ks per 9, doesn't give up much power, only a 25% hard contact rate, and less than a homer per 9. Now, if we're looking at the Indian splits versus right-handed pitching this season, they're pretty below average for the most part. They do have a little bit of power at the 170 ISO, but 24% K rate, 293 OBP, well below 300, and only an 86 WRC+. I think Lance Lynn is a fine, safe play, but if we're just chasing upside here, give me all the Corbin Burns I can handle at $10,200. Another matchup versus Atlanta always seems a bit scary because I know Ronald Acuna's out of the lineup, which obviously helps things. It's a watered-down lineup, but there's still some good bats there, like Austin Riley, Ozzie Albies, Jock Peterson's a new addition to the Braves, and he can hit right-handed pitching pretty well for power, but I think Corbin Burns is going to be just fine here. And I'm mainly just chasing that strikeout upside that he offers us each and every single time he's on the mound. He's got a really good ERA of 2.1, an excellent xFIP and Sierra in the low 2s, over a 36.5% carry, doesn't really walk anybody whatsoever, close to 13 Ks per 9, and he also doesn't give up any power whatsoever with only a .07 ISO given up, a 24% hard contact rate, and only .3 homers per 9. So Corbin Burns, I definitely think he's the easy choice over Lance Lynn today. Would I try to spin it for both? Probably not. I think that's going to limit you for your offense today, and I wouldn't say Lance Lynn's by any means a must play here. I just think he's kind of safe, but Corbin Burns definitely has way more upside. He's definitely my favorite pitching option on today's slate, and just raw points wise, he's going to grade out the best as well. I was looking at projections, and he definitely grades out a little bit better than Lance Lynn by quite a bit there, so I think he makes plenty of sense, and I have a lot of interest in Corbin Burns today. In taking a look over at Vegas, there's only a 3.8 implied team total against him. Pretty heavy favorite in 8K prop as well. And then dropping down to the SP2 options, the more than likely pair with Corbin Burns today. We have Jose Berrios, $8,100, who just seems a bit too cheap in my opinion. He has been pitching pretty well recently. Now, I know he's been in trade talks, so you always got to be a little bit careful with that with the trade deadline coming right up. So we'll see how that goes, but it's a pretty soft matchup here versus St. Louis. They're not a team that'll strike out too much, but they kind of struggle versus right-handed pitching overall, where they don't really have too much power whatsoever. Like only a 22% K rate, but only a 149 team ISO, 86 WRC plus, and a little bit below 300. So I'm not really thinking there's going to be a ton of strikeouts here from Jose Berrios, but the guy's a solid pitcher. His K rate this season has been okay at around 25.5%. Doesn't really walk too many guys. He's able to limit the power. The hard contact is a little bit up there at 33%, but nothing I would be too concerned about, and only a homer per 9. Obviously, if you look at his numbers compared to guys like Lance Lynn, Corbin Burns, they're going to look a little bit worse, but he's still got some overall solid numbers. And if we're looking over at Vegas, only a 4 implied team total against him. Slight favorite here in a 6.5K prop. At that price point, I definitely think he's a very solid SP2 option on today's slate. But again, be careful of the trade deadline because he's someone that has been in talks. Although I know the Dodgers, a team that he was linked with, they already made that blockbuster trade for Trey Turner and Max Scherzer, so I can't imagine he's going to be in the cards for them anymore. And then dropping down to some other cheaper options here, we have Logan Gilbert and Touki Toussaint. We'll start with Gilbert, $7,200. I feel like Touki was going to gain some ownership, so if you just want the direct pivot for leverage, I think Logan Gilbert is a decent option here in a softer matchup versus Texas, especially since they lost Joey Gallo, the main power threat in that lineup. So when you take him out of the equation, it definitely softens some things up here. And Gilbert's been pretty good this season. I know he's a young pitcher. He doesn't really have much big league experience, but in limited time so far this season, about 60 innings, he's got a 3.8 xFIP, which is a little bit up there, but a 3.45 Sierra, close to a 29% K rate, over 10.5 Ks per 9. Does have lean to the fly balls, but he limits the hard contact at only 29% and less than a homer per 9. Plus, if we're looking at the Rangers splits this season versus right-handed pitching, nothing to be too concerned about here. About a 25% K rate, 153 team ISO, 294 WOBA, and 86 WRC plus. And like I mentioned earlier, no longer have Joey Gallo, which is going to hurt those numbers even more. So I think Logan Gilbert's a decent pivot off of Touki Toussaint. And speaking of Toussaint here, $6,900. Pretty good matchup here versus Milwaukee. I know there's a 4.5 implied team total against him here, and he's a very heavy underdog, which when you're going up against Corbin Burns, I think that makes plenty of sense. But he's made 2 starts this season. It's a very small sample size, but he's been excellent in both games, scoring around 23 and 30 fantasy points in each one. And it's only a 13-inning sample size here, but 1.3 ERA, 2.5 xFIP, 2.8 Sierra, close to a 30% K rate, not really walking too many guys. He's limited the power so far. He's had a big lean to the ground balls with a 53.3% ground ball rate compared to a 23% fly ball rate. Limits the hard contact so far in less than a homer per 9. Super small sample size, so I hate to put anything into it. But we know he's a pitcher with some upside, and if we're looking at the splits this season versus righties for Milwaukee, striking out over a 25.5% clip. They do walk quite a bit, but only a 157 team ISO and an 88 WRC plus. So I think Touki Toussaint at that price point, a guy that'll probably gain some ownership, but if you needed some expensive bats on the slate, he's one of those ways where you can make it work. But I think that's it for the pitching for the most part, so we'll move right over to the bats. And we got some pretty fun offenses to talk about on today's slate, but as always, we will start with the catcher position, and we'll start up top with Eric Haas at a massive price point of $5,000, but I will tell you what, the Detroit Tigers have been one of the hottest offenses in baseball, as crazy as that sounds. Coming into the season, it's always, pick on the Tigers, but recently, they have been pretty darn good. I know $5,000 seems like a bit much for a Detroit bat, but with the way they've been playing, and no, this is not just recency bias from the game where they had 2 touchdowns and a field goal versus Minnesota. I think that was like on Wednesday or something, but they've been hitting pretty well for like the past month now, and now they get one of the best matchups you can ask for in baseball, and a good spot here versus Matt Harvey. I realize the past two starts for Harvey have looked pretty good. I think his most recent start, he scored around 24 fantasy points, only gave up one hit in that game, but I mean, overall, Matt Harvey's just not a good pitcher, and if people are going to be scared of the Tigers because of how well Matt Harvey pitched the past couple of starts, I'll be more than happy to take on them at suppressed ownership, but I really can't see that being the case because as well they've been hitting, I mean, people are going to take notice of that. And overall, this is not an expensive stack. I realize Eric Haas is pretty expensive, and I believe Jonathan Scope is as well, but it's not really that expensive at $4,300. I remember the past couple of games he's around $5,000, so it's nice to see that his price is a little bit lower. So really not the heart of a team to stack. Eric Haas, the most expensive guy here, but even then, I don't really think he's a must-play here, probably only more so in tournaments. I prefer him versus lefties. He's actually been murdering left-handed pitching this season. Like, he's got over a 300 batting average, close to a 400-something ISO. Like, he's been insane versus lefties. He might see one at one point here, but I like anybody and everybody in the Detroit Tigers here versus Matt Harvey, so you can load them up. They have a team total over 5, and I would not be surprised if they get closer to 5.5 by the time the game starts. They had 6 runs last night. Baltimore's bullpen's not that great, so you can sign me up for the Tigers here. And then Salvador Perez, $4,600. Kind of crazy that Eric Haas is now $400 more expensive than Salvador Perez. Just one of the more established best hitting catchers in baseball. So if you want to take the suppressed price here of Perez, I have no issue with that. I think he should be above $5,000, but he's one of the best hitting catchers in baseball. And Ross Stripling, well, I don't think he's a terrible pitcher. He's a guy that really does struggle with giving up power. He gives up 1.9 homers per 9 innings to lefties and over 2 versus righties. So you can use either lefties or righties here for KC. And I'm not really trying to stack a bunch of KC bats today. I think a guy like Salvador Perez that has a ton of power in his bat does make some sense here. It's maybe just a one-off or just a mini stack for KC today. Then Alejandro Kirk, $3,700. If you're just looking for a cheap piece of a great offense tonight, don't mind going to Kirk here. He's not that bad of a hitting catcher as well. A little bit of pop in his bat, 233 ISO in the season with a bad batting average, but they have a team total of 6.4 right now versus Daniel Lynch. I picked on Daniel Lynch last start out. I forget who it was against. I think it might have been versus Detroit. They pretty much put up a goose egg, and Daniel Lynch ended up having a pretty solid game here, but he has a small sample size in the season, and he's definitely a pitcher we can pick on here. The Blue Jays are just one of the best offenses in baseball, and if they can get the E-Rod, they can certainly get the Daniel Lynch here. So sign me up for all the Blue Jays. Pretty much the best stack on the entire slate today, but when you look at their price points, maybe not the best point per dollar stack today. And speaking of expensive guys on Toronto, we have Vladimir Guerrero Jr. here starting us off at first base. Obviously, just pretty much one of the best bats in baseball, if not the best bat here. I don't think you guys need me to tell you that he's good at baseball, but if you want me to, he's batting around 330 with over a 450 WOBA and a 341 ISO on the season. Absolutely murders left-handed pitching. He can hit righties as well just fine. The KC bullpen doesn't really scare me too much. It's a hitter-friendly stadium. Team total is 6.4 here, but it's definitely the highest on the entire slate. Loving all the Blue Jays here, but they are pretty expensive, so it's not that easy to fit them in. Using a guy like Touki Toussaint can make this viable, though. And then dropping in a Trey Mancini here, $4,800, $1,200 cheaper than Vlad. But he gets a pretty good spot here versus Skubal. Now, Skubal is not a bad pitcher. He has tons of strikeout upside, but he does struggle with a couple things, and that would be hard contact to righties. He gives up a lot of power, and he gives up a lot of homers. Over 2 homers per 9 to righties, like over 40% hard contact rate, and over a 200 ISO. And Baltimore is actually a pretty sneaky good team versus left-handed pitching this season. Not that great versus righties, but they've actually been pretty good versus lefties, and Trey Mancini is a big part of that. If we're looking at his splits versus left-handed pitching this season, over a 250 ISO. Actually, I should say over a 290 ISO, 295. 401 WOBA, close to a 300 batting average, 590 slugging, and only an 18% K, which is not bad for a guy that hits for a ton of power like Trey Mancini, so I think he's an excellent play. And you could look at a couple of other righties that I might have sprinkled throughout here. I guess I only have one other one, which is at the very bottom of the list here, but I wouldn't hate going with the Baltimore Earl stack in tournaments. I don't really love picking on Skubal too much, but he is a guy that will struggle with power, and there's going to be a homer or two here from Baltimore, and I think probably Trey Mancini and Austin Hayes down below are probably our best options at getting one. Dropping down to Old Man Miggy, $3,300. He went double dong yesterday, and again, I pretty much like all the Detroit Tigers bats. I prefer him versus lefties, but you can use anybody from Detroit here versus Matt Harvey. Then dropping in at second base, we have Marcus Semien, $5,400. Very expensive, but he's very good versus left-handed pitching. And just overall this year, he can hit righties fine, he can hit lefties, but I like all the Blue Jays here. Hits in a prime spot in the order, batting around 275 with over a 250 ISO on the season. Jonathan Scope, 4,300 bucks. You could also play him at first base, but I like the price point here quite a bit. He's a guy that will hit for quite a bit of power, and you can use anybody here versus Harvey. And on the season, Scope's been good. 290 batting average, 182 ISO, had a good game yesterday, and I think the good times keep rolling here for Detroit, and I like that price point a lot. You could also play him at first base if I didn't already mention that. And then Adam Frazier here, 3,300 bucks. He got the day off yesterday with the lefty on the mound for the Rockies, but assuming he's back in the lineup today versus righty and John Gray at only $3,300, I think Adam Frazier is a very solid, safe cash game play today. He's very cheap, 3,300 bucks. He's still priced like he's on the Pittsburgh Pirates, but now that he's on the Padres, he'll probably be in the mid 4K range soon enough, maybe even 5K depending on how well he played near future. We'll see, but the guy's been a hit machine all season long. Not a guy that's going to hit for a ton of power, but batting around 330, 368 WOBA, 132 WRC plus, and close to a 400 OBP. Assuming he's leading off for the Padres here. John Gray's not a pitcher I like to pick on too much, but I mean, he's still not that scary of a guy. I like the left-hand righty matchup here for Adam Frazier, especially at that price. Then dropping at third base, you can also play him in the outfield, but we have Chris Bryant, 5,300 bucks. John Lester, the last time I stacked against John Lester, I think he had 30 fantasy points. Not that we could ever expect that to happen again. The guy does struggle versus power righties, and we got a couple of those guys in the lineup here today for the Cubs. I do think they're a pretty interesting stack today. There's no team total out yet from the site that I pulled data from, but I saw another spot that had them right around 5. Now, I'd not be surprised if it's closer to like 5.3 or 5.2 or something like that. So I do think the righties on the Cubs today do look pretty solid because John Lester is a guy that will struggle with right-handed bats, and Chris Bryant has all the power in the world versus lefties, so I think he's a fine play, but probably more of a tournament guy for me because of that price point. And then Candelario, 4,300 bucks. I prefer him versus lefties, but he's a switch hitter, so I have the lefty righty matchup here versus Harvey. And we know Harvey sucks versus lefties, but Candelario, not a real exciting bat here, but the price point's fine, and I like all the Tigers today. Then Patrick Wisdom, 4,200 bucks. He'll strike out quite a bit, but he's got plenty of power, especially versus lefties. But on the season, he has a 319 ISO overall with a 370 WOBA, and he's about $1,000 cheaper than Chris Bryant if you can't quite afford him. And he's also eligible in the outfield as well. Then dropping into the shortstop position, we have Tatis, 6,400 bucks. I don't like 100% love Tatis here. I mean, John Gray's a decent pitcher versus righties, but it's still Tatis. He's one of the best players in baseball. If you have the money for him, I have no issue at all whatsoever playing Tatis here. And then Bo Bichette, 5,500 bucks. He'll probably end up being your cash game option here if you can't afford him. Should be betting cleanup here for the Blue Jays. They have a team total around 6.4, 6.5, and I mean, he's just a great hitter versus left-handed pitching, and I like all the Blue Jays here quite a bit. A lot of these guys do profile very well versus lefties. And then Harold Castro, $3,000, dirt cheap option here. You could also play him at second base, but just a cheap left-hand righty matchup versus Matt Harvey. I know his power numbers are really awful this year, but he does have a batting average close to 300. And I do want to mention Corey Seager is expected to be back today. I don't really love picking on Zach Gallen too much. He is a pretty solid pitcher, but it's a hitter-friendly park in Arizona. Their bullpen's not very good, and I always love Corey Seager versus righties. I believe he's $5,000. Should probably be hitting in the 2 hole there, so he's an option to look at, but a guy just returning from injury. Always kind of got to be careful with that. Then dropping down to the outfield, we have a pair of Blue Jays outfielders here in Teoscar Hernandez and George Springer. And like I say pretty much every single video, they're kind of the same play for me. If I had to pick one, I'm going to prefer George Springer here. He should be, batting leadoff, which always equates to probably an extra at-bat over a guy like Teoscar Hernandez here. Both guys have plenty of power. George Springer has a 263 ISO on the season. Hernandez above 200. Now his batting average has been way better, but it's also a bigger sample size. But Springer, still over 100 plate appearances this season, only batting 232. But I do like the power upside more with George Springer. Both guys are pretty expensive, though. They used to be in the mid 4K range, so it's definitely harder to fit them in. Then Akil Baddoo, 4,400 bucks. He's been playing very well for Detroit. Love him versus right-handed pitching, and I love lefties versus Matt Harvey, so he's kind of the perfect play in my opinion. He's definitely more expensive than he was. He was in the low 3K range. That price has definitely crept up, but it's deserved. He's been playing some good baseball, and if we're looking at his splits versus righties this year, batting right around 300, a 400 WOBA, 275 ISO, over a 570 slugging, and walking 11% of the time. Does strike out quite a bit, but he's got some overall pretty strong numbers. I do like Akil Baddoo quite a bit. I just wish he was a little bit cheaper like he used to be, but I guess I can't get too picky here. And then Robbie Grossman, 3,100 bucks. I prefer him versus lefties, but I just like pretty much everybody here versus Matt Harvey. I don't really care who you are, but he's dirt cheap, batting in a good spot in the order like all the Detroit bats today. Then Jorge Soler, 2,900 bucks. Like I mentioned earlier with Salvador Perez, I think you can make a decent mini stack here for power on the Royals. Now, I don't love a lot of these guys, but guys like Benintendi, Perez, Soler, maybe even a guy like Hunter Dozier do make sense in tournaments for me. I mean, you could play one of these guys in cash games. I wouldn't have an issue with that. But Ross Stripling is a guy that will give up plenty of power, and it's a hitter-friendly park, and they're on the road, so you get those guaranteed nothing at bats as well. Then Austin Hayes, $2,800. Like I said, Schoolboy gives up plenty of power versus righties, and I don't think I showed you guys the splits. But if you don't believe me, looking at Schoolboy splits versus right-handed pitching this season, like, he's got a great strikeout rate. Only 7% K rate, around 4.5 xFIP, which is not bad, but has a near 50% fly ball rate to righties, a 40% hard contact rate, and over 2 homers per 9. So a guy like Austin Hayes, a guy that's got some decent pop versus lefties this season, a 326 batting average and over a 200 ISO with only a 14% K rate, I think he's a guy that definitely has some cheap home run upside here versus Schoolboy, and plus the Baltimore Orioles. Not a bad stack tonight either, but I'm not loving it. Only a 4.3 implied team total here, but the righties do make some sense in my opinion. But with that being said, I think that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, and I do appreciate you all watching. You can follow me over on social media at Pennell16 on Twitter, or CPenn16 over on IG. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon and get access to some extra content, link is down below for that. There's a big list there of everything you get access to, but there's quite a few stuff over there that I think will help you guys become better MLB DFS players. And yes, I'll be more than happy to hit that refund button for you since it's the end of the month, and I want you guys to get double charged on the 1st. Don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. It's just daily fantasy sports simplified. You versus the projections that they offer each and every single day. And if you're a new signee, you can get a free money bonus up to $100. It's an instant deposit match up to $100, meaning if you deposit any number up to $100, you'll get that money back in return. So it's free money. Why not use it to your advantage when you use code CPEN over at PrizePicks.com, or you can use the link down below, but you better make sure you tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be it. Hope you guys enjoy the start to your weekend, and I'll see you in the next video.